A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You know, it happened again this morning. I was just reaching for my coffee, my foot brushed against the mess of wires under my desk, and suddenly my left monitor goes pitch black, the dreaded, no signal, floating box of despair.
The classic friction-fit failure. It is the Achilles heel of the modern home office, Corn. We are living in an era of incredible spatial computing and gigabit speeds, yet our entire digital life is held together by the equivalent of a polite suggestion from a copper plug.
A polite suggestion is putting it mildly. It feels more like a hostage situation where the hostage just decides to wander off if there is a slight breeze. But today's prompt from Daniel really struck a chord, because he is dealing with the exact same thing. He is tired of monitor cables falling out and Ethernet ports slipping away, and he is asking about this parallel universe of industrial-grade cabling. You know, the stuff the pros use that actually stays put.
I love this angle because Daniel is highlighting a massive divide in engineering philosophy. On one side, you have consumer-grade gear designed for the shelf, meaning it needs to be cheap, sleek, and easy for a toddler to plug in. On the other side, you have industrial-grade gear designed for the field. In that world, if a cable falls out, a multi-million-dollar broadcast goes dark or a factory line stops. They don't use friction, they use physics.
Well, I want the physics. I want the stuff that requires a deliberate act of God to unplug. But before we dive into the world of locking bits and bobs, I should mention that today's episode of My Weird Prompts is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. It is helping us navigate this world of BNC connectors and threaded Ethernet. I am Corn, the resident sloth who is tired of crawling under his desk.
And I am Herman Poppleberry, the donkey who spent way too many hours last night reading the technical specifications for Nutrit connectors. And Corn, we really have to start with the big one in this space, which is the SDI versus HDMI divide. If you have ever looked at the back of a professional camera or broadcast switcher, you won't see that familiar trapezoid HDMI port. You see these round metallic nubs called BNC connectors.
Right, the twisty ones. I remember seeing those on old analog equipment, but I didn't realize they were still the gold standard for high-end digital video. Why is the professional world so allergic to HDMI? Is it just the locking mechanism, or is there more to the story?
It is a combination of mechanical reliability and signal integrity over distance. SDI stands for Serial Digital Interface. The connector it uses, the BNC, has a bayonet mount. You push it in, you give it a quarter turn, and it is locked. You could literally swing the monitor around by the cable. Not that I recommend it, and it wouldn't budge. But more importantly, SDI is designed to run over coaxial cable. Because of that architecture, you can run a 3G or 6G SDI signal up to 100 meters, 300 feet, without needing a single booster or active repeater.
Wait, 100 meters? I start getting sparkles on my screen if my HDMI cable is longer than 15 feet. If I try to go 30 feet, I basically need a fiber optic HDMI cable that costs as much as a small car.
Precisely. HDMI is a high-speed parallel interface that is incredibly sensitive to capacitance and timing issues. It was never meant for long hauls. But SDI is a serialized stream. It is rugged. And here is the kicker that Daniel will love. SDI doesn't deal with HDCP.
Oh, the handshake of doom.
The handshake of doom. Most of the time when your screen flickers or stays black for 5 seconds when you turn it on, that is the HDMI copy protection protocol failing to agree that you aren't a pirate. SDI is a professional pipes and plumbing standard. It assumes that if you plugged it in, you want the video to show up, No handshakes, no flickering, just a rock-solid 10-bit or 12-bit video feed.
Okay, so Daniel's question is, can we actually use this at home? If I want to stop my monitor from disconnecting, do I have to go out and buy a $5,000 Red Cinema camera just to get an SDI port? Or is there a secret hack for the rest of us?
This is where it gets fun. You can actually bridge these two worlds for less than you might think. Companies like Blackmagic Design make these little microconverters. You can get an HDMI to SDI converter for about 50 or 60 bucks. You plug your PC's HDMI into that, run a cheap, rugged BNC coaxial cable as long as you want, and then put another converter at the monitor end to turn it back into HDMI.
So, for roughly $120, I can replace my fickle 15-foot HDMI cable with a professional grade, locking SDI run that will survive a literal earthquake.
It sounds like a lot for a cable, but think about the frustration it saves. And if you're doing a permanent desk setup where the PC is in a closet or across the room to keep the heat and noise away, SDI is the only sane way to do it. Plus, BNC cables are incredibly cheap. You can buy a 50-foot pro-grade coax cable for like $20. It is the converters that cost the money, but once you have them, you have a broadcast-grade infrastructure.
I love the idea of using broadcast grade to watch cat videos and join Zoom calls. But let's talk about the other thing Daniel mentioned, Ethernet. I have definitely had that moment where I move my laptop or shift my desktop and I hear that tiny plastic click of the RJ45 tab snapping off. Once that tab is gone, that cable is basically a loose noodle.
The RJ45 connector is a miracle of 1970s cost cutting that we are still punished for today. It was designed for telephones and stationary office desks. It was never meant for the tactical environments we put it in now. In the industrial world, if you are running Ethernet to a robotic arm or a sensor on a train, you don't use a plastic clip. You use something like the M12 connector. It is a circular threaded metal connector that you literally screw into the port. It is waterproof, vibration-proof, and it will never, ever slip out.
Okay, but my router doesn't have threaded metal holes. My motherboard doesn't have M12 ports. Is there an industrial middle ground for networking that doesn't require me to solder new ports onto my expensive gear?
There is, and it is called etherCON. It was developed by Nutric, the same people who make the XLR connectors you see on professional microphones. What they did was brilliant. They took a standard RJ45 connector and they housed it inside a rugged, die-cast metal shell that looks exactly like an XLR plug.
I've seen those on stage at concerts. They use them for digital snakes and lighting rigs.
It uses a latching mechanism. You push it in, it clicks, and to get it out, you have to press a metal release lever. It is rated for thousands of mating cycles. A standard plastic RJ45 is usually rated for maybe 500 to 1,000 plugs before the plastic fatigues. An etherCON setup is basically buy it for life.
But again, the port problem. My PC has a standard rectangular hole. Does etherCON fit in there?
Not directly. This is the trade-off. To get the full benefit of etherCON, you usually have to change the chassis connector or the wall plate. But for a home user, there is an elite version of this hack. You can buy locking RJ45 cables from companies like Panduit or even specialized vendors on Amazon. They use a different kind of boot that requires a tiny key or a specific tool to release. It isn't as rugged as a metal etherCON, but it completely solves the accidental unplugging problem. It turns your Ethernet port into a secure connection that can't be pulled out by a snagged foot or a curious cat.
I actually like the idea of a key for my Ethernet. It feels very high security. Sorry, I can't go offline. I lost the key to my internet. But Herman, isn't there a simpler way? Like, can't I just buy a better version of the standard cable?
You can, but you have to look for snagless designs with reinforced latches. But honestly, if you want that industrial feel, the real hack is looking at the power cables. This is the one that people overlook the most. The standard C13 power cord, the one that goes into the back of every monitor and PC, is notorious for being loose. If you have a monitor that flickers when you adjust the height, it is almost certainly the power cable wiggling in the socket.
Oh, I hate that. You spend $2,000 on a high refresh rate OLED monitor, and it is powered by a 5-cent piece of plastic that barely stays in the hole.
Well, the industrial world solved this with something called V-lock or locking IEC cables. Brands like Schuler make them. They look like a regular power cord, but they have a little yellow or red tab on the top. When you push it into the monitor, it actually grips the ground pin of the device. Even if the monitor doesn't have a specific locking port, these cables are designed with much tighter tolerances and a friction lock that requires a deliberate pull to remove.
And those aren't expensive, right? I feel like I've seen those for like 15 or 20 bucks.
It is one of the cheapest upgrades you can make to your reliability. If you have a PC that you absolutely cannot have losing power, maybe a server or a workstation doing long renders, switching to a locking IEC cable is a no-brainer. It is such a simple mechanical fix for a problem that causes so much digital heartbreak.
It is funny how we focus so much on the bits and the speed and the software, but we ignore the physical reality of the connection. It is like building a Ferrari and then using Scotch tape to hold the wheels on.
That is exactly what consumer-grade cabling is. It is good enough for the average person who sets up a computer once and never touches it again. But for people like Daniel, and let's be honest, people like us who are constantly tweaking things, moving monitors, and crawling under desks, good enough is a recipe for constant failure.
So let's talk about the why here. Why is there such a massive gap? Is it really just cost? Because a metal screw lock on a USB-C cable can't cost more than a few cents more to manufacture than a plastic one.
It is cost, but it is also a philosophy of user-friendliness that backfires. Manufacturers assume that if a cable is hard to pull out, a user might accidentally tug on it and rip the whole computer off the desk. So they design them to break away easily. In their mind, a disconnected cable is better than a broken port or a laptop on the floor.
I mean, I guess that makes sense for a MacBook in a coffee shop, but for my desktop that weighs 40 pounds and hasn't moved in 3 years, I want it anchored to the core of the earth.
And that is where the industrial standards come in. In a factory, they assume the equipment is bolted down. They assume the person plugging it in knows what they are doing, so they prioritize reliability above all else. Take USB-C, for example. We all know how fragile those little connectors feel. But in the world of machine vision, the cameras used on assembly lines to check for defects, they use screw lock USB-C.
Wait, there is such a thing as a USB-C cable with screws?
Yes. There is actually a formal specification for it. It has 1 or 2 tiny thumb screws next to the plug. If you have a high-end industrial USB-C hub or a specific type of PCIe card, you can screw the cable directly into the chassis. It becomes a rigid, immovable part of the machine.
Okay, I need that. Where do I get that? My external hard drive disconnects if I even look at it funny.
You can buy them. Companies like Nunex or even some specialty vendors on Newegg sell dual screw lock USB-C cables. The trick is that your device has to have the screw holes. Most consumer laptops don't. But if you are building a pro workstation, you can buy a USB-C PCIe expansion card that has those screw holes. Suddenly, your high-speed data connection is as solid as a bolt on a bridge.
This is the secret hack Daniel was talking about. It is that realization that you don't have to accept the flimsy standards of the consumer world. You can go off menu.
It is very much an off-menu world, and it extends to audio too. We've all dealt with a 3.5mm headphone jack that crackles if you rotate it. The pro world looked at that and said absolutely not. That is why we have XLR and TRS. They are bigger, they are made of metal, and they have locking latches. It is why you never see a 3.5mm jack on a concert stage. It is a toy.
I feel like we are slowly turning into those grumpy old tech guys who only use equipment that looks like it belongs in a nuclear silo. Back in my day, we screwed our cables in, and we liked it.
But there is a reason those guys are grumpy, Corn. They are grumpy because they've spent 40 years fixing things that shouldn't have broken in the first place. When you see the difference in build quality between a $5 HDMI cable from a big box store and a broadcast-grade SDI cable with Belden wire and Nutric connectors, it is hard to go back. The industrial cable feels like a tool. The consumer cable feels like a disposable straw.
So if I'm Daniel and I'm looking at my desk and I'm seeing this rat's nest of flimsy plastic, what is the priority list? What gives the most reliability bang for the buck without spending $1,000 on converters?
I would say start with the power. Get those locking IEC cables for your monitor and your PC. It is a $20 fix that eliminates one of the most annoying random failure points. Second, look at your Ethernet. If you have a cable that is constantly falling out, don't just buy another cheap one. Look for a locking RJ45 cable or even just a set of those Panduit lock-in blocks. They are tiny little plastic inserts that go into the port and prevent the cable from being removed without a tool. It turns a standard port into a secure one for about $3.
And for the video? Because that is usually the most expensive part to industrialize.
For video, if you don't want to go the full SDI route with converters, look for locking HDMI cables. Brands like Kramer Electronics or Sewell make these. They usually have a small screw above the HDMI connector that fits into a special bracket you can stick onto your device. It isn't as elegant as a native SDI port, but it creates a mechanical bond between the cable and the monitor. It stops that sag that eventually ruins the port.
I've seen those. They have like a little wing that you screw into the chassis screw of the graphics card. It is a bit of a kludge, but I bet it works.
It works incredibly well, and it is way cheaper than replacing a graphics card because the HDMI port got wiggled to death. That is the thing most people don't realize. The cables are cheap, but the ports they plug into are expensive and hard to repair. By using a locking cable, you aren't just protecting the connection, you are protecting the motherboard or the monitor's internal circuitry.
It is basically insurance for your hardware. You are spending $20 on a cable to save a $500 monitor.
And if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, you can look at M-series connectors for things like sensors or custom peripherals. But for 99% of home office frustrations, the big three locking power, locking Ethernet, and locking video will solve the problem.
What I find fascinating is that as our home setups become more permanent, people aren't just using a laptop on the couch anymore. They have these dedicated command centers. The consumer standards are starting to show their age. We are putting field-level stress on shelf-level hardware.
That is a great way to put it. The prosumer movement has mostly been about specs, higher resolution, faster refresh rates, more megapixels. But the next frontier of the prosumer world is mechanical specs. We want things that don't break. We want things that stay connected. We are finally realizing that a fast connection is useless if it is disconnected.
It is the buy it for life philosophy applied to the back of your computer. I think Daniel is onto something here. It is about taking back control from the friction fit lobby.
The friction fit lobby sounds like a very boring but very powerful group of lobbyists in Washington. But honestly, Corn, this is where the weird in my weird prompts really shines. It is looking at a common frustration and realizing there is a whole world of engineering out there that already solved it 50 years ago. We just have to be willing to look past the shiny consumer packaging.
I'm sold. I'm going to go order some of those locking power cables right now. I'm tired of my monitor blinking every time I sneeze. But Herman, before we wrap up, I have to ask, is there any downside to this? Is there a point where too much locking becomes a hazard?
There is. If you have a setup where people are constantly tripping over cables like a busy office or a house with small kids and dogs, a breakaway cable is actually a safety feature. If a cable is locked in and someone trips on it, they aren't just pulling the cable out, they are pulling the whole PC off the desk and onto their head.
Ah, the MagSafe philosophy. Apple had it right with the magnets. It is the ultimate anti-industrial connector that is actually brilliant for consumer use.
Precisely. So the rule of thumb is, if the device is stationary and the cables are managed, go industrial. If the device is mobile and the cables are a trip hazard, stay consumer. But for a desk setup like Daniel's, where everything is tucked away, industrial all the way.
Well, I think we've given Daniel enough cable porn to keep him busy for a few weeks. It really is a secret world once you start looking for those BNC and M12 keywords.
It is. And once you start seeing those metal connectors, everything else starts looking like a toy. It is a dangerous path to go down, Corn. Your wallet might not thank you, but your uptime will.
Uptime is the only metric that matters at 3 in the morning when you are trying to finish a project. This has been a fascinating deep dive. I think I'm going to start a side business just making tactical home office setups for people who are tired of their wires falling out.
You could call it SlothLink. Guaranteed to stay connected even if you move at a literal snail's pace.
Hey, I take offense to that. Sloths are very efficient. We just don't see the need to hurry. And with locking cables, I don't have to hurry to plug things back in. I can just stay in my chair.
Efficiency through laziness. I respect it.
It is the ultimate goal. Well, I think that is a wrap on the secret world of industrial cables. Thanks to Daniel for the prompt. It definitely gave me some hardware envy.
And thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping our metaphorical cables plugged in.
Big thanks to Molal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. If you're enjoying the deep dives into the weird side of tech, a quick review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really helps us out. It helps other cable curious people find the show.
We are also on Telegram. Just search for My Weird Prompts to get notified when the next episode drops.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We will catch you in the next one.
See ya!
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep